Man, my mix sounds so boring and dull. If there was only a way to add some form of spice to it.
Yes, there is. Just add distortion to everything.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. A common complaint that I hear from people when it comes to discussing the sound of modern music is the lack of character, the boringness, and the lack of the je ne sais quoi that was found in older records. And one of the reasons it's the way that it is, it's because most modern music is recorded straight into the box. That means that we are using digital converters, and those have one particularity to them. They are quite good at recording the sound as it is. The thing is that they are devoid of that color and that saturation that came out of fantastic boxes such as antique preamps or those fantastic mixing desk. And in this video I'm gonna share with you some ways that you can actually bring that sound back to your recordings even though you might be working in the box. Because we're gonna be rocking guitar pedals, some of the gear that I have access to here in the studio, but also I'm gonna be showing you how to do it with plugins. So stay tuned for this. But before we go, if this is your first time in the channel, I welcome you because in here I show you every single thing I do in order to create, write, produce, and of course perform my music live. Because I know that making a living as a musician is not a dream, it's a possibility. And if I can do it, of course you can do it. With that being said, let's rock and roll. The first thing that we gotta understand is that when it comes to distortion, there are many different types of it. And well, let me use the whiteboard to explain that to you. Here we go. In order to record music, we gotta make sure that the sound coming in is loud enough. And we achieve that through the use of an amplifier, which is comprised of an input and an output controller. The input controller is known as gain, and it will dictate the amount of volume inside of the system and how loud it will get before it hits the output stage. The harder we push the gain, the louder our signal becomes. For as long as our signal doesn't trespass the gain limits, it will preserve its qualities and it's going to be considered a clean signal. The thing is that if we keep cranking up the gain, we're gonna be getting closer, if not surpassing those limits, thus creating overdrive or saturation. That's known as clipping. The space between our clean signal and the limits is known as headroom. And depending on the design of our circuit, we will have different ways for that clipping to take place. When only one of the poles of our signal is clipped, that's known as an asymmetric clipping system. And those are commonly found on tube-driven amplifiers, giving us a warm and kinda colorful tone. In contrast, symmetrical clipping means that both of our poles are gonna be clipped equally. This results in a much more dissonant tone, but it's extremely musical because it creates much more harmonics. More on that later. Since clipping is altering the shape of our waveform, depending on how the circuit is designed, we can have soft or hard clipping. And as the name implies, soft clipping will give us a much more gentle sound, but also it's going to preserve much more of the qualities of the sound before the clipping. In contrast, hard clipping is going to distort the sound so much that it's going to turn it into something completely different. Both of those are dependent on the amount of gain or how loud the signal comes in. One of the many uses for distortion and saturation is sound design. That means that we can actually create an entirely new sound just by applying a certain amount of distortion to a given signal. In the next example, we're going to be applying distortion to a bass drum using Decapitator, which allows you to select different saturation circuits. Pay attention to how much the signal, the sound of our kick drum changes depending on which circuit we're using. We change completely the nature of the sound of that kick drum just by applying distortion to it. It happened due to the fact that distortion, one of many things that it does, it's also the creation of harmonics, which in very simple terms, it's adding more of the good stuff to a given sound if they load correctly. Before computers, music was recorded through the use of preamps, which, as you might understand already, it's a device that amplifies a signal. And in this case, you could be discussing microphones or DI instruments such as synthesizers or organs. The thing is that somebody clever enough got the idea of plugging a guitar directly into the preamp of a mixing board, and well, they discovered that it distorted in a very musical way. And that started off the pursuit of distortion in a much more manageable package and also something that you could use on the stage. introducing the guitar pedals that we know and love, and some of us hate as well. Now, let's see how this can be applied to the sound of a bass guitar coming into the preamp. Let's see what we got. Now we'll do the same, but this time around working with the synthesizer. In this case, we're going to be sending the output of my Moog Motor 32 into the input of the color palette. And in this case, I have a particularly beautiful sounding distortion circuit that excels at rocking bass sounds. Let's see what we get. Back in the day, recording also involved using tape machines, and those, as well as you have guessed, can be overloaded or overdriven by cranking up the gain on those guys. And in this example, I'm going to be using this drum pattern that I created on machine, and I will be using the saturation affecting the entirety of the drum kit, creating a much more interesting sound. Let's take a look. Now let's talk about fuzz. As we already understand, fuzz is a very insane amount of distortion applied to a signal. And in this case, I'm going to be using the Husimittas by Earthquaker Devices, which is a fuzz pedal that is part of my pedal board. And I'm going to be applying that to the sound of my guitar that you heard in the introduction to this video. The signal flow is the following, girls and boys. I got first my H9 that I'm using to create an octave, which is adding an extra octave to the sound of my guitar, so I can get a beefier tone, and from there I'm hitting the front end of the Husimittas. And from there, I'm going straight into my Tone X pedal, which is rocking a fairly clean snapshot and tone from my Mesa Boogie amplifier, which, by the way, you can download for free in Tone X. So let's take a listen. Being very frank with you, I am not necessarily the biggest fan of fuzz on guitar, but not because it's a bad effect by any means. I consider myself much more of a high gain guy, but I can't deny the beautiful tone and the beautiful musicality that it's part of the fuzz, particularly when it comes to the responsiveness of a good fuzz pedal such as this one and guitar. As you can see, there is plenty of stuff to be gained out of distortion, and pun totally intended, by the way. The thing is that one thing that I forgot to mention is that distortion, also by the nature of how it works, can be used to create some form of compression that is quite beautiful, musical, and actually quite badass because it's kinda natural sounding. I totally encourage you to use it on any mix you work on. So this takes us to the ending of this video. I hope you found this quite useful and entertaining as well. And if you like to support this kind of content, the best way to do it is by listening to our music on Apple Music or Spotify, and also by following us on Instagram and X, because that's the best way for you to get in touch with us in a much more personal basis. With that being said, guys and boys, the only thing left to be remembered is that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about. And remember that I'll see you when I see you.